Hi everyone, my name is Kylie Draper, and for my oral requirement for this class, I'll be discussing Selena and La Bamba. I felt these two films really compared and contrasted really well, and I thought they would be interesting to highlight different portions of them and discuss the differences in the political agendas with them, and because they dealt with two really iconic singers who really paved the way for a lot of other singers to come in that industry. Starting out with Selena in the movie Selena, she was born on April 16th, 1971, and from a really young age, she had a huge support system from her family, and her dad was a driving force on her success. He really pushed her to be better, and from a young age, he even forced her to learn to sing in Spanish, and she later learned Spanish because of that. So that was really important in her career. Her life was unfortunately ended very short, and as was her career, because she was murdered on March 31st, 1995 by someone in her fan club, and that was so shocking because she had done so much for her community, and it was a really big loss that a lot of people took. To start with political agenda, back then times were very different, and she was really popular during the 90s, and women were not seen as equal as we are today, and especially ethnic women of that time. She wasn't openly popular at first, despite her being so talented, which was so surprising because it's sad that we judge people even though they have so much talent and they are worthy of the success that they should have. I remember an interesting thing her father said in the film about being Mexican American is, you're not good enough for the Americans and you're not good enough for the Mexicans. And I found that really interesting because she was judged on, they were expecting her to be judged on her Spanish because she wasn't completely fluent and it was broken, and also she wasn't completely accepted by Americans because of her Mexican heritage. So that was something interesting that I thought was brought up, and I think it did ring true, especially during that time. This can also be seen when they were nervous, the political agenda, when they were nervous about how she was going to be viewed in Mexico because of her Spanish-speaking abilities, but luckily she was just so well-liked and so well-rounded that they accepted her and they really loved her. As far as her for economics, she started out very slow, and her family definitely struggled. This could have been seen in the film when her father bought all her siblings instruments, and it was such a big deal, and her mom was so surprised at first because instruments are expensive, and they didn't really have the means to do that, but he just thought music was so important that he wanted to make sure that he got that for his kids. As she became famous, more money started pouring in, but I feel that even though that was going on, she still stayed very humble and very true to character. Something interesting that I found, so the director had a hard time writing this film because he didn't want to sanctify Selena, and he wanted to portray her as a real person who dealt with real world problems and did struggle sometimes. But he wrote, "My God, she's a role model to the Latino youth. We can't show her running off against her father's wishes and marrying this guy." But ultimately, he decided that is what happened, and he wanted to portray her as real, and so they did end up putting that in the movie because that's really what happened with her. She did go and marry Chris Perez. For Richie Valens, he was born on May 13th, 1941, and he started off very small. He had the support of his mom too, and his mom was his driving force, just like Selena's dad was hers. He did have a brother named Bob, and they definitely did not see eye to eye. They had a lot of struggles throughout their relationship, but ultimately it can be seen that right before his death on February 3rd, 1959, in the plane crash, he and Bob talked on the phone, and they really did love each other, even though throughout their whole life they dealt with a lot of differences. For the political agendas in this movie, I thought that because he was popular during the 50s, they were dealing with the civil rights movements, and Mexican Americans had a lot of discrimination and racism to deal with at that time, and people were just so judgmental that even though he had the talent, they didn't want to give him the success that he deserved, just like Selena, but he just dealt with a lot more racism because he was Mexican American during such a time of discomfort in the nation. Because he was a Mexican American, he was given the side eye and oftentimes not taken seriously, and this can be seen throughout the whole movie. This is why his manager and him decided to change his name, because they felt that if he took a step back from, his heritage and made himself a little bit more neutral, they thought people would accept him more, and it actually did work, especially for being on the radio. He changed his name and he ended up getting much more popular. As far as his mom and him, they came from very, very small beginnings in a little town village, a farming community, and when his brother Bob came, he kind of got them out of there, but his money wasn't really good money, and that was a big problem between the family. But ultimately, he was able to get popular in time. It did take a lot of time, but because of that, they started from very small beginnings, and he was able to buy his mom like her dream house, which I thought was really amazing. Luis Valdez was the director of this film, and I thought this was really interesting. He said Latinos were traditionally cast as villain roles, and I was able to tell the story of a rock and roll pioneer. So I thought this was really interesting because I think it is oftentimes seen that Latinos are cast as the villain role or the bad guys in a movie. So it was really cool to see Richie, kind of a rags to riches story, and he came up and he was just amazing. And I think it was cool that the director highlighted that and said he felt honored that he was able to tell this story of somebody who paved the way for so many others after him. Overall, I think the two films were really great, and I think they were really educational and entertaining at the same time, and I think they're very eye-opening. Both of them dealt with problems with racism, and Selena dealt with problems with sexism, and after everything, and they had such a slim chance of becoming famous, but they just pursued, and they opened so many doors for so many after them, and that's why their untimely deaths were just so tragic for so many. Thank you.